Hello there, my name is Hido and welcome as we dive into the dungeons and maybe the dragons. I don't really want to dive into dragons, but maybe we will, of this brand new set, and we're looking at the Commander Precons. And well, we've got a rather interesting one. It's Sefris of the Hidden Ways. That's a white, a blue and a black. That's Esper, ladies and gentlemen, for a legendary creature, human wizard. It's a 2/3. Whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, venture into the dungeon. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now that is a pretty big downside, but, well, our opponents have turns. Let's take advantage of that. Then we have Create Undead. Whenever you complete a dungeon, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So quite a cool little reanimate sort of deck here. And there's a couple of cool ways to trigger it, and I like it a lot. Let's have a look at one of the dungeons. Lost Mine of Phandelver? The cave entrance is Scry 1, so this is where you go in first, and then you choose the direction you want to go into it. You can either go down into the Goblin Lair or into the Mine Tunnels. So, Goblin Lair, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. Yeah, pretty alright. Mine Tunnels, create a treasure token. Alright, nice bit of ramp and fixing. Then we've got three options. Storeroom, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Dark Pool, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Or Fungi Cavern. Target creature gets -4/-0 until end of turn. All of those pretty terrible in terms of EDH, but nice bit of incremental value. And then Temple of Dunothoin is draw a card, which is, you know, a nice payoff. And then we've completed a dungeon, we get to reanimate one of our creatures. Really quite a cool commander. And, you know, I like this sort of slant on the dungeon building sort of idea. The whole dungeon thing, I think is really cool. A couple of people have been a bit negative about it, but I think it's very flavorful. And the fact you get to choose your sort of directions through it makes each game a little different every time. If you like the videos that I'm making, please do consider subscribing. I'm going to make one of these for every single legendary creature. By God, there's a lot of them. Without further ado, let's get into my top 5. And at number 5, we got Hedron Crab. And this is one way to trigger the, you know, once each turn. Just putting creatures from our graveyard into our graveyard from our library with a bit of self-mill. Single blue for a crab, 0/2, with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. I'm choosing me. So we're going to build around sort of a big reanimation sort of synergy. And getting things into your graveyard just through playing lands, absolutely wonderful. And we're going to get the extra sort of things from, you know, the venturing into the dungeons. To go along with these, to trigger on our turn, yes, you can just play a land. But then we want to trigger on our opponent's turn. So things like Marsh Flats, which is a fetch land. It's a land, you can tap it, pay 1 life, sacrifice it. Search your library for a plains or swamp card and put it into the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Will trigger the landfall ability again from Hedron Crab, mill a little bit more on a different turn, and then we get, another venture into the dungeon. Flooded Strand, exactly the same, except it gets plains and an island. And these sort of effects are really cool if you're playing things like Brainstorm. You know, you can brainstorm, put cards on top of your library, shuffle them away to, you know, get to see a couple of different things. Then a different mill card here, Codex Shredder. 1 mana for an artifact, you can tap it, target player mills a card. So we can just mill 1 card a turn with this. But in the late game, we can pay 5, tap it and sacrifice it. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Really, really nice. Rebuy whatever big sort of threat that you've got into your graveyard. You know, I've milled it. We've got a trigger into the dungeon. Let's get it back and get a cast trigger off it. Then Thought Scour is a fantastic card in this sort of deck. 1 blue for an instant. Target player mills 2 cards. Choose me again. And we draw a card. So for a single blue, we're not losing cards in our hand. And we're potentially venturing into the dungeon at instant speed. Amazing. Then there's Hairstrung Koto. 6 mana for an artifact. This is a bit of a dumb one. Tap an untapped creature you control. Target player puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So for simply just tapping a creature, this gets around Summoning Sickness. So the creatures that you just come in, you can tap them straight away. So that Goblin token that you made before, well, you can use it to mill yourself again. And this can be done at instant speed. So on each of our opponent's turns, we can mill, potentially hit a creature into our graveyard, and then venture more into the dungeon. Then we talked about Thought Scout. Mental Note is exactly the same card, but you cannot target, so it only does us. Single blue for an instant, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, draw a card. So again, a great way to keep parity in cards and also venture into the dungeon. Absolutely fantastic. In at number 4, we've got Nadar, Selfless Paladin. So we want to be venturing into the dungeon with our commander, but you need a package of venture cards because while the commander can do it by herself, you know, a lot of self-mill, things like that, we want to be entering the battlefield affecting. What is those words? Words are spelling out to me in the wrong way. But these sort of cards, they enter the battlefield and they also have an attack trigger. So Nadar, it's got vigilance, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeon. And then if you've completed the dungeon, all of the creatures you control get +1/+1 forever, for as long as Nadar is on the field. So a nice little 3-mana 3/3 that, you know, gets you a trigger, can get you through event over and over again by attacking, and it's just a nice little body. Then we've got Yun T. Malison? I don't know. It's a snake rogue, 2-mana 2/1. It can't be blocked as long as it's attacking alone. So this can get through if we're just attacking with it, and if it deals combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. So each turn we can just keep sort of plowing in. Even if our opponents, you know, they don't have any blockers, this can get in with a couple of other creatures. Absolutely fantastic. Then we've got Akarak. I hate these names. The Archlich. 3-mana for a 5/5 zombie wizard. When it enters the battlefield, if you haven't completed Tomb of Annihilation, return it to its owner's hand and venture into the dungeon. So Tomb of Annihilation is a different dungeon. You know, there's 3 different dungeons you can pick from. So if I was to have this card in my hand, I wouldn't complete that. I don't really want him on the field. I just want to be able to keep playing him over and over again, keep venturing through the dungeons, and just keep our sort of reanimation synergy going. And if you have any way to reduce his cost, you know, make him cost a couple less, this could get down to just a single black, bounce, over and over again. Keep venturing into the dungeon. Then we've got Dungeon Descent. Ooh, how fitting. To land, it enters the battlefield, taps, and it taps for a colorless, which is not good in a 3-color deck, but you can pay 4, tap it, tap an untapped legendary creature you control, which could be our commander, venture into the dungeon. Although you can only activate this as a sorcery, but having this effect on a land is very powerful and, you know, will come in clutch in some games. Then we've got Barrowing of Clan Undead. 4-mana for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, venture into the dungeon. Then, whenever it attacks, return up to 1 creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield if you've completed a dungeon. So another way that we can just keep rebuying things, keep reanimating. Absolutely fantastic and works very well in the deck. And it's Dwarf Cleric. Lovely. Then we've got Midnight Pathlighter. 4-mana for a 2/3. Creatures you control can't be blocked except by legendary creatures. Now that in and of itself is a really cool ability. Nice bit of evasion. And how many legendary creatures our opponents can be playing? Well, definitely their commander. But are they going to be, you know, running more sort of incidental value creatures? You know, like Secret Door up there. This can basically make our entire team unblockable. Whenever one of our creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. So we can just keep venturing into the dungeon with this card, and it just lets our creatures get in for tons of damage. Then we've got Secret Door. 1 blue for a defender, so it can't attack. 0/4, but you can just pay 5 to venture into the dungeon, although you can only activate it as a sorcery. This is really nice, you know, a nice mana sink. It's just a mana sink, you know. Do you really want to be playing this in your deck? No, I don't. The artwork's nice, but it's not that exciting. But if you've got mana knocking around, use it. Which brings me on to number 3, and this is the sort of card that I structured this deck around. It's Radiant Solar. 6 mana, which comes in the precon when you buy this commander. 6 mana for a 3/6 with flying and lifelink. When it or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, venture into the dungeon. So I talked earlier about enter the battlefield, and the venture sort of cards work fantastically with this. But it's the last ability that got me excited. Pay a white, discard Radiant Solar. Venture into the dungeon, and you gain 3 life. Okay. That looks a bit like cycling, if you ask me, and I love me a bit of cycling, and this is the sort of direction I'd take the deck in, surprisingly enough. Archfiend of Ifnir, 5 mana for a 5/4 with flying. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, put a 1/1 counter, -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. Then it has cycling for 2, which means you discard this card to draw a card. So why is this good? Well, when you're cycling, you are putting a creature card into your graveyard, which triggers your commander and progresses you through the dungeon. And cycling can be done at instant speed. So you can just keep cycling each of your opponent's turn, venture further into the dungeon, and then, because cycling creatures tend to be quite large, you've got some big beefy boys to reanimate with your commander's complete the dungeon ability. Horror of the Broken Lands, 5 mana for a 4/4. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. And cycling for a single black. So, cycling's the best. Curator of Mysteries, 4 mana for a 4/4 with flying. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, scry 1. And that's cycling for a single blue. So a nice threat on the battlefield, nice flying evasive threat, but then cycling early game, late game, it's the best thing that's ever happened. And if we're cycling this, a lot of the venture into the dungeon cards were based on enter the battlefield effects. So cards like Astral Drift is a 3 mana enchantment. Whenever you cycle Astral Drift or cycle another card while Astral Drift is on the battlefield, you may exile target creature. If you do, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is nice flicker, takes our, if someone's pointing a removal spell, we cycle something, exile our big venture creature, it comes back in, we venture into the dungeon more, maybe trigger that. Absolutely wonderful. And it has cycling. Astral Sliders is the card that Astral Drift is based on. 3 mana for an enchantment. Whenever a player cycles a card, you may exile target creature. If you do, return the exile card from the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of its end step. So again, another way we can trigger all the enter the battlefield effects. Absolutely fantastic. Then we've got Valiant Rescuer. 2 mana for a 3/1. Whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. And cycling for 2. So you can just cycle this, or you can slowly build up a big army with all the cards that you're going to be cycling. Which brings me on to my number 2 pick. And at number 2, we've got Grimoire of the Dead and mass reanimation effects. Like our commander reanimates one thing at a time whenever you complete the dungeon. But there's a lot more scope. We can fill our graveyard with tons of creatures through cycling and other means, and then bring them all back. Grimoire of the Dead is a 4 mana legendary artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it, discard a card. So if you're discarding a creature card, that'll venture us into the dungeon using our commander. Put a study counter on it. Then tap, remove 3 study counters from it, and sacrifice it. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. They're black zombies in addition to their other types. So this can absolutely win you the game. Yes, your opponents can see it coming, but because of the discarding a card, venturing into the dungeon sort of mechanic, I think it works so fantastically well. To go along with this, we've got Sepulchral Primordial. 7 mana for an avatar with Intimidate, and it's a 5/4. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you may put it on up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This is just a mass reanimation, If we manage to discard this early, we could use our commander to bring this back, and then we've got a board state that's absolutely colossal. Really, really nice. Then we've got Living Death. 5 mana for a sorcery. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard and sacrifices all creatures they control. Then puts all cards in the exile this way onto the battlefield. So you just take your graveyard and flip it straight onto the battlefield. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Yes, your opponents will get some value off this, but as we're cycling so many things away and, churning through our deck, we should have the best chance of doing this. Entreat the Dead, triple black and double X. For a sorcery, return X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And you can miracle it, which means if it's the first card you draw in your turn, you may cast this card for its miracle cost and at instant speed. So double black and X. So why is this in the deck? Because, it's a bit clunky. Well, because you're going to be cycling so much through the deck, there's a high chance, and you're going to be doing it, once each turn, there's a high likelihood that you're going to do it on your opponent's turn, flip Entreat the Dead, boom, absolutely massive reanimation spell for quite a little amount of mana. It's just a really cool include, and the art's wonderful. Then we got Rise of the Dark Realms. 9 mana for a sorcery. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. Absolutely game-winning spell. You're going to just absolutely hose people with that. Then we got Shieldred Whispering One. 7 mana for a Creator with Swamp Walk, and it's a 6/6. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Really cripple your opponents, make them sacrifice their best creatures, whittle down the board state, and we can rebuy a big creature each and every turn. Then we've got Herald of the Forgotten, a very cycling-centered card here. 8 mana for a 6/6 with flying, Cat Beast. When it ends the battlefield, if you cast it, return any number of target permanent cards with cycling abilities from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this rebuys all of the creatures we've cycled. Wonderful. Who doesn't love a Cat Beast? Which brings me on to my number 1 pick. And this is sort of very much based around the fact that cycling cards, because their cycling abilities, you know, what you do early, 1 black, but the actual creature costs 7. Well, let's make an advantage of that. Though the fact that our CMC in our deck is going to be pretty high makes Mineshrieker incredible. 2 mana for a 1/1 with flying, and it's a spirit bird. Pay 2, target player puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Mineshrieker gets +X until end of turn. What X is that card's converted mana cost? So with this, we want to be targeting ourselves. We want to be milling a creature card, which will venture further into the dungeons. And then, because everything's going to be so large in terms of CMC, we're going to have a massive Mineshrieker to slam in for loads of damage. And we can do this each turn. So each turn we could pay 2, mill the top card if it's a creature card. Hooray! We get to venture further and further into the dungeon. To go along with this sort of high CMC on top of the deck sort of thing, Baneful Omen, 7 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, each opponent loses life to the card's converted mana cost. So a lot of the cycling creatures, big, massive, 7 cost creatures, we're going to be doming them for 7 each turn. Then Twilight Prophet, 4 mana for a vampire cleric with flying and ascend. So if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the City's Blessing, reveal the top card of your library. You put it into your hand, and each player loses X life and you gain X life, where the X is the card's converted mana cost. So again, we're really going to slam people for tons of damage, and we're going to gain a ton of life. Finally, we got Sorent Grim Nemesis. 6 mana for a 6 loyalty planeswalker, and the main thing we're interested in is the +1. Reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to the converted mana cost of that card. Then -X, deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, you gain X life. And -9, put a number of 1/1 black vampire knight creature tokens with lifelink onto the battlefield, equals the highest life total among all players. That's a lot of little dudes, you know what I mean? But the main thing we want is the +1 to just keep doming our opponents with all of our cycling idiots. Then another way to dome people is Uriko, the Tiger's Shadow. A blue, a black, and 1 for a human ninja, and it's a 1/3, and it has ninjutsu, commander variant, but it works, pretty well from your hand. So you can return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand. Put this card on the battlefield from your hand, or the command zone, tapped and attacking. Okay, so an unblocked attacker, you just swap it, basically, and then Uriko is on the field attacking. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to the card's converting mana cost. So why is that good? Well, if we're getting in with, our enter the battlefield venture sort of creatures, Uriko can bounce them back to our hands so that we can replay them to venture further into the dungeon. But then Uriko will deal some damage. We're going to reveal the top card and dome people for tons of damage from all of our cycling idiots. To go along with this, we've got Ingenious Infiltrator. 4 mana for a 2/3 with ninjutsu for a blue and a black. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So a nice bit of card advantage there. Then we've got Higger of the Still Wind. 5 mana for a 3/4 with ninjutsu for 4. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a ninja card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and if you do, shuffle your library. So this can search up Uriko or, any other tribal sort of card that you wanted to find. Target ninja creature you can't be blocked this turn. So this allows us to get in with our ninjas over and over again for just 2 mana. And those are my top 5 cards for this brand new commander. Obviously, cycling's the best thing that's ever happened, but hopefully you've found a couple of cool recommendations for this commander. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please do like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you soon. Bye.